you're spending way too much time preparing your speeches. If you're having to write out your speeches word for word and then spend agonizing hours cramming those words into your head, you're doing it wrong. The reason why you're having to do this is because you're using the wrong system to structure your speeches. And you're going to remain in agony until you use a better system. I say all this because when I started out, that's exactly what I was doing. Was writing out scripts word for word and cramming them in my head. In particular, I used to follow a system and a series of points that was recommended by Brendon Burchard. And some of you know that's who first inspired me to become a speaker. And one of his courses, he talked about how to create a seminar structure. And there was a 12-point this and a 10-point that. And I used to follow these points. Now, they worked really well, don't get me wrong, but they were very complex and probably too complex for where I was at that stage of the journey. This is the type of thing that he might be using for running a 4-day event. I wasn't even getting a 4-hour event. I was lucky to get 4 minutes at times. So I realized that this complexity, trying to make a 7-minute speech or even a little 15-minute workshop using 12 points, it was too much. So I had to find a way to condense it and simplify it so that I was confident whether I was given 2 minutes, 2 hours, or 2 days, I could come up with something that I could engage the audience with. And so I found a 3-point system. Not 12, not 10, but 3 points. And using just these 3 points, you can literally create any speech that you want. I used this for my 5-minute wedding speech, and my wife told me I had to be 5 minutes, so it needed to be concise. And I've also used it for running multi-day events as well. It works at whatever end of the spectrum you are. What is this 3-point system? Well, I'm going to share it with you in this video. The first part of the system is the parable. Parable. Begin your speech with a story. Stories are how we communicate meanings, how we build connection. You can never really go wrong starting with a story. If you look at all of the religious holy books, all of them are told through parables, aren't they? And there's a reason for that. And there's a reason why they've been told that way, and also a reason why they've endured for hundreds and literally thousands of years. Because stories hold power. And you can communicate so much to your audience through telling a story. So when in doubt, start with a story. You can never really go wrong. And this can be lots of different types of stories. This can be a personal story. I told you a little bit of a personal story in terms of trying to find this structure. It could be the experience of a client that you've worked with. It could be a story of someone else, a historical figure, or perhaps a family member or a friend that you have. There's lots of different stories you can tell. I'm not saying there's any one story that's particularly good to start with, but just start with one. The second part of this structure is point. This links in to the parable in that your parable needs to have a point. Your story needs to have a message. And this is where a lot of speakers go wrong when they're telling a story. They've literally just listened to advice like mine of you can't go wrong telling a story, and they go, okay, cool, I'll tell a story. But as a speaker, you're not telling a story just to entertain. You're not just telling a story to buy some time. You're not just telling a story even to convey facts and information. You're telling a story because there's something you want your audience to take away from that story. And that's why the word parable, I think, is good. Because a parable has a message behind it, doesn't it? One of the most famous parables, the Good Samaritan. What's the point of the Good Samaritan parable? Love thy neighbor as you love your own. Love thy neighbor as you love your own. That's the point of that whole story. That's what Jesus wanted people to take away when he told them the parable of the Good Samaritan. So you need to think out, what's the point of this story? And this is where things can get slightly out of order, because although you start with the story, you need to know what point you're making before you choose what story to tell. This is the underlying message of your speech. If your audience take nothing else away from your speech, and remember your audience will maybe only take about 10 or 20% away of your speech anyway, what's that key 10 to 20%? If they only take a Twitter headline out of your speech, what's that Twitter headline? That's the point of your speech. Your story has to have a point. Your speech has to have an underlying message. If you're finding the process of being a speaker tough going, then I would recommend getting my book, Rise and Inspire. This is the manual that I wish I had starting out when I was trying to use those 12-point plans to prepare speeches and workshops. This really simplifies the process for you. What are the basic ingredients that you need to do when you start off as a speaker? And in this book, we also talk about how do you start to build some of those initial speeches and some of those initial workshops and events you might be running. We go through this 3-point system that I'm sharing with you in this video, and lots of other ideas of how you really get concise on what your message is and how you're delivering it to your audience. Rise and Inspire is a #1 bestseller on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and audiobook, all of the formats. If you want to simplify your journey as a speaker, then you can get your copy by clicking the link in the video description below. Now, let me share with you the third part of this 3-part structure that will help you prepare any speech, anywhere, anytime. The third part of this speech structure is practice. You've got to give your audience something practical that they can do with what you've told them. And again, big mistake that a lot of speakers, and in particular the motivational style speakers make. Imagine I get onto stage and I tell you the secret to public speaking that I've learned throughout my decades of being a speaker. I've narrowed it down to one thing, and that thing is confidence. If you have confidence in yourself as a speaker, then you will succeed in your speaking endeavors. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'm here all week. What's wrong with that speech? As the audience, don't you feel a little bit shortchanged? Okay, so the secret to being a speaker is being confident, but how do I become confident? It's missing the how, isn't it? And this is a mistake that lots of speakers make, is they don't provide their audience the next step on the journey you're describing for them. And this is what you need to do as speakers. As speakers, you're leaders. And I know that that can be a little bit uncomfortable, but basically all you're doing is leading your audience along a path and along a journey, and you're outlining some of the steps that they're going to take. So when you signpost the journey to them, when you tell them what's possible for them, show them how they can begin to take that journey. So you've got to give them something practical. An exercise, a tool, a technique, something where they can actually apply what you've been saying into their lives. Can you imagine this video if I told you, okay, instead of trying to cram things in word for word and memorize a script and use this 12-point plan, what you could do instead is just use a much simpler process, and you can use it for any speech, and it's just 3 steps. That doesn't help you at all, does it? You need to know the 3 steps. You need to get a basic understanding of, okay, so we start with the story, and this is why we want to do that, and then the story needs to have a point, and then I need to give the audience something practical that they can do and take away. And that's where your audience will really appreciate you as a speaker, because a lot of speakers will just go up there and give some kind of feel-good, rah-rah motivational fluff, but they don't provide the direction. They don't showcase the steps. If you showcase the steps, and it doesn't have to be all the steps, just the beginning of the staircase, as Martin Luther King said, you don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. Your audience just need that first step. Give them the first step, whatever it is. And that's what I've done for you here today. I've given you the first step in how you can begin to structure your speeches more effectively and more efficiently, using a simple 3-point system. And this can range from a small talk. I'm going to tell a 30-second anecdote. I'm going to give a 1-sentence summary of that. And then I'm going to give an idea of how the audience could implement that message that I've just shared with them. And boom, you could do that in 60 seconds or 60 minutes or a little bit longer than that. So there you have it. That's your first step. Parable, point, practice. And you might be asking, okay, for a longer speech, do I just tell one story with one point, with one takeaway? No. You can actually just repeat that. So you tell a story that has a point and then a practical takeaway. And then after that, tell another story which demonstrates another point and then give another practical takeaway. And that's how you build up to speaking for a much longer period of time. And it all starts with just those 3 basic components. How simple is that? So you don't need to spend hours writing out scripts and cramming them into your head. Just remember those 3 aspects. Follow them sequentially. And before you know it, you have done your speech. It won't be agonizing. It won't be excruciating. You'll actually find that it's simple and, dare I say it, also quite fun as well.